Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. So today I wanted to do something, two videos. First is to look at how 360 kind of sucks in VR at the moment. And then the really interesting thing is I want to talk about Hyperscape. This is a new app from Meta which showcases how Gaussian splats, basically a new scanning technique, can be used. So at the moment, Gaussian splats are relatively new. Not many people are doing them. So people tend to use 360s as a way to give people, let's say, virtual tours. And 360s are very good when you're on a 2D screen. But the experience when you're in VR, where there's so much potential, kind of sucks. So let's have a look at this one here. So this is Matterport. It's probably the biggest platform for 360 tours in the real estate market, and they have a special kind of camera which captures basically photogrammetry. So you basically saw there very briefly that there is a 3D model of this yacht. You can see it's kind of a messy model. It's got holes in it, but this is created from their scanning cameras, and you have to sort of position the cameras in several places, sometimes hundreds of places around the yacht or the apartment. The first thing is that this doll's house view doesn't work. I was going to say it doesn't work very well using the VR controls, but they seem to have fixed it since the last time I looked at that. So you can actually move around it, but you're not in VR. You're looking at this through the browser of the Quest. So the idea is you can click on this. So let's see if this really works. And you should get to a location. Okay, maybe not. But yeah, so you click on it, enter in VR, and now you're inside one of these 360 images which the Matterport camera captures. So the cameras are pretty good. They're fairly high resolution. And you can probably see there that I should be able to click on these hotspots on the floor. And again, this wasn't working last time I tried it, so maybe they fixed it. And you've got this virtual tours. And yeah, when that works, actually these virtual tours are pretty good in VR. So you could basically show somebody the yacht in VR, but you'd have to teach them, how to move around like this. Now, one thing that I've noticed on Matterport is that I think it really depends on some settings on the camera, or maybe just the angle that the camera records at. But for some reason, scale doesn't feel quite right when you're in VR and you're inside these Matterport images. So, of course, you don't have any sense of depth because it's a photograph wrapped onto a sphere, but somehow scale doesn't feel quite right. When you're looking into the distance like this, it's okay. But if I try and go inside this yacht here, what you'll find is that some things that are close to the camera, like that banister there's that handrail feels very close, very big. It somehow just doesn't feel quite right. This stuff feels big here. One interesting thing I did notice is that there is actually a mesh. So you're actually in a 3D world. So sometimes, as you can see there, my controller disappears inside this part of the Bimini here. So there is actually a 3D model there. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But essentially Matterport scans they just don't quite feel to scale when you're in VR. And this could be a restriction of 360s. But as you'll see on another scan, I think it's just the height of the camera, first of all. So the camera is not at head height, and I'm standing up here in my room. So that's one of the things affecting that. So if I come into this space here, we'll feel it very much here. When you're standing next to a bar, this bar feels like it's just below my eye height because of the angle that the camera was when it was taking it. So it doesn't feel right. I feel too low, or everything feels slightly too big. So that's kind of one of the disadvantages, I think, of using Matterport if you're going to give people VR tours. The camera resolution is really important in 360 because you're stretching a 4K image over a giant canvas, and especially, when you get to the tops and the bottom of these spheres, or actually in the middle, actually seems to be the worst bit. It's stretched a lot, and as you can see, maybe you can see in the distance here, these boats, these cars are very blurry, and that's just because the resolution of the photograph is not high enough. Insta have now an 8K camera that is better, and I think most Matterport scans are older these days because the technology's been on the market for a long time. So yeah, when Matterport works, so all of these features are working just now, you do have a reasonable 360 tour. As you can see, I've walked into the saloon of the vessel here. I do get a good impression of it. I can turn my head around and get a feel for what it's like inside. But the simple fact, there's a bit of a tired sofa. The simple fact is that the camera is too low. As you can see here, that's a standing position for the captain there, and that the camera is so low just makes it kind of difficult to get a good impression in VR. It works very well if I come out of VR. It works very well, as you can see here, in a 2D browser. That's perfectly acceptable. And I'll make this a bit bigger so you can walk around in the browser and you can get that nice 3D effect. So it's made for browsing in a 3D browser. And you can see you don't see this issue of the height so much. You can see it. That's funny enough, it's all blobby there. It's not showing up clear. But you don't get the issue of the height so much when you're viewing it on a 2D browser. And that's what Matterport's main use case is. So that's fair enough. I did bring up a couple of other examples here. So this is virtualtours.com, and this is a nice Azimuth, which does support VR. And the camera here, again, I don't think it's exactly the right height, but it feels slightly higher. But for some reason, there seems to be slightly less distortion. So we've got photographs in here, we've got hotspots, and these images somehow look better. Perhaps the yacht has been prepared better. It does look like slightly clearer photography here. But I still have this impression that this is unusually close, probably because it's right next to the camera. So again, if the camera was at head height, then you would have a better virtual reality tour. But then again, the usual use case is to use these things in like non-VR mode on a 2D device. But this is an example. I think whatever this technology is, it comes across better. There's less warping somehow. There's less, or maybe the crew who've taken the pictures have taken the pictures in better spots further away from things. So this tour feels better. But anyway, 360s in VR, I think there's loads of potential if you capture them correctly, if you have a high enough resolution camera, if it's at head height, the capture, then I think 360 tours can be very effective. The other thing I want to talk about today is that all of these platforms, these Matterport tours, the browser-based virtual tours like this, they're single player. And there is the technology to have multiplayer in these things. So imagine you were in here, you had a multiplayer where you could see the other avatar in here, so the salesperson or the yacht designer, and that they could talk you through the details of this yacht. And I think that would be very powerful in VR if you could be in there with the person, even on a 2D screen. Even on a 2D screen, I think that would be very powerful. But again, I go back here. It's quite interesting because it's still tracking my head. But you can see the quality of these 360s on a browser. They just look fantastic. It's a great way to see a real physical asset on a 2D device, right? So very good lighting here. And you get an impression of the space. You can move around. So you get the feeling that you know the space. It's the volume of the space, which is very hard to get by looking at 2D pictures without these kind of joined up things. Right, so that's 360s in VR and why that sucks a little bit. And, it's probably a medium here, mostly for the 2D browser. And I'll stop now.